India has come a long way since independence. It is almost 77 years now, and we're here to know more about the history of Indian economy since 1947.
What? No.
That's a lot of history to learn. It is so boring. You dum-dums. Earth has been around for 4.5 billion years, and India for millions. We're just talking about 75 years. So shut the hell up and listen. It might also help you in your exams.
Are we doing all of it today?
No, Ali, we shall try to do this in 5 sessions. And if you have some good questions, you might even do more.
So, but what is the use of knowing this? Aren't we usually talking about engineering stuff on this channel?
Well, engineering thrives in a conducive environment, and so does industry. Our aim is to create a clear picture of what that environment could look like. Oh. Alright. You can make some reels with this after. It'll give you millions of views. Alright. Here we go. India became independent on the 15th of August in 1947. And at the time, India's GDP was a mere rupees 2.7 lakh crore. For comparison, it's close to 350 lakh crore now.
But my father keeps saying it's $3 trillion.
Yes, you dumbass. But that is not the Indian currency. We work in INR, and I shall talk to you in INR. It is the Indian history and economy. And for all the NRIs and foreign audience, this is what the number looks like in dollars. So, government of the day, headed by Prime Minister Nehru, was faced with a tremendous challenge. One is unemployment, poverty or extreme poverty, illiteracy, and at the core of it all, a very de-industrialized economy. Now, we all know what the first 3 things mean. But what is a de-industrialized economy? Any guesses?
Well, seems like an economy where the relative importance of the manufacturing sector declines significantly in comparison to other sectors such as services or agriculture.
That is correct. A de-industrialized economy typically sees reduction in manufacturing output, less jobs in manufacturing, urban decline, abandoned factories, and overall deteriorating infrastructure.
But aren't US, Europe deindustrializing today as well?
Quite so. But that is after they have seen and realized the benefits of industrialization and economic prosperity. And we are yet to know if it's a good thing in the long run anyways. So moving on. Let me also talk about industrialization. So, as per renowned economist, Professor Jagdish Bhagwati, industrialization refers to the process by which an economy is transformed from primarily an agricultural to one based on manufacturing of goods. This transformation typically involves technological advancements, increased productivity, and a shift in the labor force from rural agricultural sectors to urban industrial sectors. Bhagwati also emphasizes that industrialization is a key driver to economic growth and development, which eventually leads to higher incomes, improved living standards, and greater economic diversification. But more on this a little later. Let me get back to 1947. So we had a deindustrialized economy where traditional handicrafts were unable to compete with machine-made goods. We were a drained agrarian economy, heavily dependent on imported machinery for processing even agricultural goods. Domestic manufacturing of capital goods was virtually non-existent. And know this, by this time, in the Western world, in Britain and US, their economies had already industrialized, which means they were able to produce these kind of machines and do their production in a mechanized way.
Let's take the examples of cotton textiles. Before British rule, a skilled weaver in Bengal could produce beautiful muslin fabric that was highly valued all over the world. When the British came in, cheap machine-made cotton fabric from Britain flooded the Indian market, which was selling for much less than the handmade muslin. As a result, the weaver could not sell his muslin and lost his livelihood, and the traditional industry declined. Now, when India got independent, some of these cotton mills were established, but they relied on machines imported from Britain. And the local industry was small and not enough to replace the lost traditional jobs. And that's how we became a drained agrarian economy.
So this meant the government, as it was required to, came up with some policies. What is a policy? A policy is a policy?
Huh?
Moving on. In the era of 1948 to 1980, the industrial policy was mainly focused on planning, protection, public sector undertakings or PSUs, industrial licensing, and pricing controls. Let me talk about planning. A planning commission was established in 1950. Its main functions were assessing resources, formulating a plan to utilize resources, identify obstacle in utilizing these resources, establishing conditions for success, determining machinery required for success, and of course, monitor progress and recommend any adjustments for economic development planning. Now, what are resources? Resources can mean things like land, labor, capital, investment, information, and many more things. Economics is all about balancing the allocation of these scarce resources to different priorities so that there is overall economic growth, assuming that growth is the expected outcome. Moving on. The focus of the first three plans was on increasing the rates of savings and investments and the sectoral allocation of such investments. This means households save more and government incentivizing them to save more through higher interest rates in, let's say, FDs. This money then can be used to invest in sectors the government prioritizes. At this time, India largely followed the Harrod-Domar model while building the first plan from 1951 to 56. The Harrod-Domar model, developed by economists Sir Roy Harrod and F.Z. Domar, focuses on the relationship between economic growth, savings, and investments. It was focused on a collection of several investment projects, mainly in the public sector. The Harrod-Domar model had shown that an increase in an economy's rate of growth required an increase in its domestic savings rate, capital formation, planning, foreign aid. It was presumed that higher savings would automatically be transformed into higher investments.
But so where would people invest the money they saved?
Smart guy, huh?
This is where the Mahalanobis model comes into picture from 1956. P.C. Mahalanobis was an Indian statistician and scientist known for his pioneering work in the field of statistics. And he was an architect of the second five-year plan from 56 to 61. Mahalanobis is especially known for concepts like the Mahalanobis distance. You can Google it separately. Well, he developed and used statistical tools and mathematical models to forecast economic outcomes and optimize resource allocation. These models helped in making informed decisions about investments and priorities. The Mahalanobis model, also known as the two-sector model, divided the economy into two sectors, the capital goods sector and the consumer goods sector. It emphasized the growth of the capital goods to achieve long-term economic growth. Mahalanobis proposed that the economy should devote a higher proportion of whatever capital goods it produces to increasing the capacity of the capital goods producing sector itself. Progressively, larger capital goods industry would help sustain larger physical investments.
So, I don't get this. How would investing in larger capital goods lead to more investments?
Good question. Raju, doesn't your mom run a bakery? Tell us how it became successful. What? Raju, why don't you pay attention? Doesn't your mom run a bakery? Yeah, so tell us how it became successful.
Yes. Well, she had a lot of spunk. She saved up some monies and bought an oven, a stand mixer, started baking cakes, and people liked it. And then she baked more cakes and hired people and bought bigger machines. And now she earns like 10 times more than what she earned 5 years back.
Excellent. So here, an investment in creating capital goods industry like ovens and mixers manufacturing companies led to more investments in creating a business like a bakery, which led to jobs and more money all around. Similarly, what Mahalanobis proposed led to investments in heavy and basic industries like hydroelectric power projects, coal production, more railroads, with an aim that this would lead to further industrial development.
But so if people saved, then they would consume less, and that would make more goods available for exports, and monies received from such exports could then also be used for procuring these kind of capital goods. Would that not increase the exports and also generate capital required for procurement of these kind of goods?
Good question. This policy implies an assumption that the economy would be a closed one in nature. So, as you suggest, savings made could also result in export of those goods that were not purchased domestically. Given low labor costs in India, there would be a comparative advantage in exporting such items. So, just to explain what is comparative advantage, consider the example of US and China. China has a comparative advantage over US when it comes to cheap labor. So China finds it easier to sell goods, simple goods, which need lesser skills and therefore are easily manufactured by cheaper labor, more abundantly available in China. Whereas US specializes more when it comes to specialized knowledge or specialized engineering know-how. So, similarly, in India, cheap labor would have been a comparative advantage. So, one justification in these goods was that these goods would not really fetch the margins, the consumer goods would not really fetch the margins that capital goods could, and may eventually lead to an imbalance in trade when buying capital goods from other countries. Also, the demand and prices of these goods were very elastic. So, moving on. This policy meant lesser allocation to the consumer goods and therefore slower growth of the consumer goods industry.
Hang on, but in a labor abundant country like India, what was the justification to invest in capital goods sector?
The justification was long-term growth. Capital goods would result in higher growth rates in long term, and that eventually would help reduce poverty.
All right, let me get this straight. So, like for Raju's mom's bakery example, she could have bought an imported oven to begin with, but instead of that, she could have bought the flour and yeast and flavors, etc. at a cheaper rate. The business would be even more profitable in the beginning, isn't it? And then seeing more profitable bakeries, Indian industrialists would start manufacturing ovens in India itself.
Well, yes. Of course, that is a very valid criticism of the policy.
Also, if all the money was invested in capital goods, what happened to food security? Did capital goods industry generate enough employment? Should India not have focused on a broader base for development?
God, it becomes more and more difficult to explain these policies every year. Are you guys using ChatGPT for asking your questions? I don't get paid for that.
So, but why did they think this way? Why not let the markets decide for themselves?
Well, these are very big questions. Yes, the policy had a heavy industry bias,
Okay, evidently.
and there are arguments on both sides. Let's park some of the questions for later and focus more on history. So moving on. The third plan from 1961 to 66 followed the same basic philosophy, but there were food security concerns. The need to become self-sufficient in food production became paramount.
So, wasn't this an outcome of the imbalance in the previous policy itself?
Oh yes, of course. So they learned their lesson. There was a growing recognition among policymakers that balanced development, incorporating both industrial and agricultural growth, was essential for sustainable economic progress. Recurring droughts and crop failures had a severe impact on agricultural output and food availability. These natural challenges emphasize the need for better agricultural practices, irrigation facilities, and drought-resistant crops. However, this plan faced many challenges. One was, of course, natural calamities. So the third five-year plan faced significant challenges, including severe droughts in 1965-66, which adversely affected the agricultural output and overall food security. The second problem was wars. The Indochina War in 1962 and the Indo-Pak War in 1965, they diverted a lot of resources and attention from agriculture and economic development to defense needs. These kind of challenges, they led to financial constraints and shortfalls in achieving a lot of these plans' targets. So overall, the adverse events of the 1960s and the early 1970s made planning priorities take a backseat to crisis management. And in fact, there was a plan holiday from 1966 to 1969. So, any guesses on what were some of the key implications of such a policy which was taken in this era?
Well, vastly increased role of the public sector itself.
I have heard something that's called license Raj.
Raju? Raju, pay attention. Huh? What could be an implication of the policies in 50s and 60s? How would you ensure that an oven made in India is bought by a mom, even if an imported oven is better and may even be cheaper? Well, I would protect the business from imports. Exactly. And that is what we shall talk about in the next session. The implications of policies in 50s and 60s and early 70s. Raju, you should read up about these three topics and you will explain each implication in more detail when we meet next. Great. So thank you for your time today. Hope you've learned a little bit about the industrial economy of India and the early policies that the Indian governments came up with. We'll learn more about this in the coming sessions. Have a good day. Bye.